The blood on Samuel Washington's lips was the first sign that 9 people were about to die. He stood in the doorway of Johnson's tobacco barn, trembling hand pressed against the rotting wood, staring at Harriet Tubman with eyes that had seen 85 years of slavery. 7 people crouched in the shadows behind him, a young family with 3 children, 2 nervous brothers and a woman with murder in her eyes and a knife in her dress. They'd been waiting for Moses to come back to Maryland. But when the old man stepped forward and whispered the words that would change everything, Harriet knew this wasn't just another rescue mission. This was a test that would either prove her legend or destroy it. "Miss Harriet," Samuel said, blood speckling his words, "I ain't never been free, not one day, but I'm gonna die free, or I'm gonna die trying." It was September 1858, and the air smelled of dying leaves and fear. They were ready to run. They'd been ready for weeks, ever since word spread that Moses was coming back to Maryland. But now there were 9. Samuel, bent and broken from 60 years of cotton fields, could barely walk to the outhouse without stopping twice. His wife Martha, 78 with hands like twisted branches, moved like every step might be her last. Both were dying, Samuel from lung sickness, Martha from a lifetime of beatings. "You can't make the journey," Harriet said, her voice hard as iron. 60 miles, swamps, mountains, running when the dogs come. Samuel's face crumpled. "Please, Miss Harriet. 2 months, that's what the doctor said. 2 months and I'm gone. But I can't, I won't die somebody's property." Martha stepped forward, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. "We've been talking about it every night. We'd rather die on that road than die in these chains." Harriet Tubman stared at them. 9 years ago, she'd made the same choice, run or die as a slave. That night in 1849 she'd left behind her husband, her parents, everything she'd ever known. The scar on her forehead, from a 2-pound weight her master had thrown when she was 15, throbbed like it always did when hard decisions came. She remembered her own terror, stumbling through these same Maryland forests, certain every shadow held a slave catcher. Now she was the one people trusted with their lives. "All right," she said finally, "but you keep up or we all die. No exceptions." The next sound changed everything. Horse hooves, still distant but moving fast along the main road. Riders, maybe 6 or 7, their voices carrying on the night wind. Samuel heard them too, his face going gray. "They found out," he whispered. "Master Johnson knows we're gone." Harriet's mind raced. The safe house was 10 miles north, open country for the first 6 miles, nowhere to hide if those riders spotted them. She'd led people through worse, but never with someone who couldn't run. "Move," she hissed. Now, they slipped into the tree line just as torchlight appeared on the road behind them. Harriet counted the flames. 7 riders spread out wide, searching. Their horses snorted and pawed the ground, sensing the tension. One of them was shouting orders in a voice that made Harriet's blood run cold. "Check the creek bed. You 3 take the north path. And remember, they've put a fortune on the head of the woman they call Moses, enough to buy a plantation. Alive if possible, but dead works too." The bounty had doubled since her last mission. She was worth more than most plantations now. James pulled his children close, his 6-year-old daughter burying her face in her father's shoulder. Marcus, the younger brother, was breathing too fast, panic starting to set in. His hands shook as he remembered watching his own father get dragged away by slave catchers 3 years ago. David grabbed his arm, whispering harshly, "Stay calm. She knows what she's doing." But Harriet was watching Samuel struggle through the underbrush, each step in agony, and wondering if she'd just signed everyone's death warrant. That's when the hounds found their scent. Not the regular farm dogs, these were hunting hounds, trained to track runaways. Their howls cut through the night like knives, each one closer than the last. Samuel's breathing turned ragged, the lung sickness making every breath a battle. Blood speckled his lips with each cough. Harriet could hear the handlers shouting commands, "Good boy, Rex, stay on the scent." And they went this way, fresh tracks in the mud, the sound of boots splashing through creek water. Getting closer, getting louder. "How much further?" Rebecca asked, her voice tight with fear. "Too far," Harriet muttered, then louder. "We change course, head for the marsh." The marsh. Even healthy people avoided it at night. Treacherous water, hidden roots, quicksand patches that could swallow a man whole, but it would kill their scent, confuse the dogs. "Miss Harriet," Martha whispered, "Samuel can't swim." "Then we carry him." Samuel tried to protest, but his words dissolved into a coughing fit that sprayed blood across his hand. Martha stifled a sob. "Listen to me," Harriet said, her voice cutting through their fear like a blade. "I've made this run 17 times. Never lost anybody, not one. But tonight's different." She looked at each face in turn, James with his children, the two brothers, Sarah with her hidden knife, Samuel and Martha holding hands like teenagers. Tonight we find out who we really are. The marsh water hit them like ice. Within minutes, they were waist-deep in black water that smelled of rot and death. Samuel gasped, the cold shocking his sick lungs into spasms. The little girl started crying, quiet, desperate sobs that her mother couldn't comfort. One wrong step would kill them all. That's when Marcus slipped. The big man went down hard, his foot caught in something underwater. He came up gasping, eyes wide with panic. "Something's got me, something's, shut up," Harriet snapped, but it was too late. The dog's barking changed pitch. They'd heard him. David lunged forward, diving under to free his brother's foot from the tangle of roots. Sarah moved to help steady Samuel, who was swaying dangerously. James lifted his daughter onto his shoulders while Rebecca took the hand of their 8-year-old son. Harriet felt it then, the weight of every decision, every life balanced on the edge of her choices. This was the burden Moses carried. Not just guiding people to freedom, but deciding who would live and who would die when there was no good choice left. These weren't just passengers. They were James's children who'd never see 10 if they were caught. Marcus and David, brothers who'd sworn to die together rather than be separated again. Sarah, who carried that knife because she'd made her own promise about what would happen if slave catchers found her. And Samuel, 85 years old, dying, asking for just one day of freedom before he met his maker. Every person she'd ever led to freedom carried someone else's hopes. Every choice she made echoed through families she'd never meet. This was why she hadn't slept more than 2 hours straight in 8 years. This was why her hands never stopped shaking until she was back in Philadelphia, counting heads, making sure everyone was safe. Behind them the torchlight was getting brighter. "Can't go faster," Samuel wheezed, leaning heavily on Martha. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. "Yes, you can," Harriet said, and something in her voice, not harsh now but fierce with certainty, made him straighten. "You know why? Because I was once right where you are." She kept talking as they struggled through the marsh, her voice steady and strong. 15 years old, blood streaming down my face from where Master threw that weight. Could barely see, barely walk, but you know what kept me moving? Same thing that's keeping you moving now. Samuel's breathing eased slightly. "What's that, Miss Harriet?" "The knowledge that every step forward is a step nobody can take back. Every breath you draw as a free person is a breath they can never steal again." Then Samuel collapsed face first into the freezing water. Martha screamed, a sound that cut through the night like a knife before she caught herself, hand clamped over her mouth. Samuel wasn't moving. His face was underwater, and the marsh was too deep here for his feet to find bottom. "Get him up," Harriet hissed, diving toward the old man. James grabbed Samuel's shoulders while David took his legs. When they lifted him, water poured from his mouth, mixed with blood from his ravaged lungs. "He ain't breathing," Martha sobbed, falling to her knees in the mud. Harriet pressed her ear to Samuel's chest. "There, faint, but still there. He's alive, but we got to move him now." Behind them, not a mile away, torchlight flickered between the trees. The dogs were getting closer. Time was running out. For the next hour they carried Samuel through hell. James and David took his shoulders, their hands cramping from the weight. Marcus and Rebecca supported his legs, struggling not to slip in the treacherous mud. Martha walked beside them, one hand on her husband's face, whispering prayers in his ear. The little girl, shivering on her father's shoulders, kept asking if the old man was going to be okay. "He's sleeping," her mother lied, but her voice cracked with tears. When Marcus stumbled and nearly dropped Samuel's legs, Sarah stepped in without a word. When David's strength gave out, even the young boy tried to help, his small hands gripping Samuel's belt. They were a family now, 9 strangers bound by desperation and Harriet Tubman's iron will to leave nobody behind. The horses entered the water. Someone had entered the marsh. Someone was following their exact path, moving fast despite the treacherous footing. Harriet motioned for silence, her hand moving to the pistol concealed under her coat. "State your business," she called softly into the darkness. A familiar voice answered. "It's William Reynolds." Harriet's blood turned to ice. Reynolds was a conductor she'd worked with before, a white man who ran a safe house 15 miles north. But what was he doing here? "Prove it," she said. "Your grandmother's name was Modesty. You told me last spring when we enough." Harriet relaxed slightly, but something felt wrong. Reynolds appeared out of the darkness alone, moving too easily through water that had nearly killed them. "Harriet, thank God," he panted. "They raided my place an hour ago. Federal marshals, local sheriff, slave catchers, everybody. They know about tonight." Samuel sagged against Martha. "We're trapped." "No," Reynolds said quickly. "I know another way. Old Cherokee Trail leads to a cave system. We can hide there until they give up the search. It sounded perfect. Too perfect. Harriet studied Reynolds' face in the dim starlight. Same features, same voice, but something in his eyes. Which marshals? She asked casually. Thompson and his deputy, the one with the scar. Thompson had died 6 months ago. Harriet had heard about it from 3 different sources. The real Reynolds would have known. And another thing, Reynolds was left-handed, always carried his lantern in his left hand. This man held it in his right. The man standing in front of her was a killer. "Get behind me," she whispered to the others, her hand finding her pistol. "All of you, now." The man who looked like William Reynolds smiled, but it wasn't Reynolds' smile. Too wide, too cold. Behind him, barely visible in the darkness, Harriet caught the glint of metal. He wasn't alone. "What's wrong, Moses?" the fake Reynolds asked, still wearing that terrible smile. "Don't you trust an old friend?" That's when she saw it, a silver badge pinned to his coat. Federal Marshal. This wasn't just a trap. This was an execution. "Run," Harriet said quietly. "When I count to 3, you run for those trees and don't look back." Martha gripped Samuel tighter. James pulled his children close. Marcus and David exchanged one last look, brothers ready to fight together. The man who looked like William Reynolds smiled, and in that smile was everything evil about the world they were trying to escape. "Smart woman. Too bad smart ain't gonna save you tonight." He reached for something under his coat. Harriet was faster. The gunshot echoed across the marsh like thunder. The fake Reynolds toppled backward into the dark water, and didn't come up. For a moment nobody moved. Then Lucy started crying again, not from fear this time, but from relief. "Is he dead?" Marcus whispered. Harriet was already moving, pushing them toward the far shore. "Don't matter. That shot told everybody where we are. Move." They ran. Samuel, dying and exhausted, somehow kept up. Martha, 78 years old, splashed through the shallows like a woman half her age. The children stopped crying and started running. Behind them voices shouted, and dogs howled, and torchlight danced across the water like demons. But they reached solid ground. They reached the tree line. They reached an abandoned grain storage barn. Different from Johnson's place, this one belonged to Quaker friends, where allies waited with dry clothes and hot food and promises that the next part of the journey would be easier. Samuel collapsed the moment he was safe, just fell to his knees in the barn's entrance, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Martha knelt beside him, taking his face in her hands. "We made it," she whispered. "Samuel, we made it." He looked up at her, then at Harriet, then at the faces of the people who had carried him when he couldn't carry himself. "Am I free now, Miss Harriet?" Harriet knelt beside them both. They had made it to the safe house, still dangerous territory, but they were alive. Samuel's eyes were open but unfocused, his breathing shallow and labored. Martha held his hand, tears streaming down her weathered face. Am I really free, Miss Harriet?" Samuel whispered, his voice barely audible. Harriet looked at this man who had survived 85 years of bondage, who had risked everything for just a taste of dignity. She thought of her own grandmother, who had died in chains, and her own mother, still enslaved somewhere in Maryland. "Yes, Samuel," she said, taking his other hand. "You're free. You've been free since the moment you decided to walk with us." Samuel smiled, a real smile, peaceful and complete. "Martha, tell the children, tell them their grandpappy died a free man." "I will," Martha sobbed. "I will, my love. And Miss Harriet, thank you for—" Samuel Washington died holding the hands of 2 free women, under a sky no master could claim, breathing air that belonged to him alone. Martha didn't cry. Not yet. She kissed his forehead, smooth and cool now, whispered something in his ear that no one else could hear, words from their wedding day 50 years ago, promises they'd kept through decades of separation and pain. Then she closed his eyes gently and stood up. "He got what he wanted," she said simply, her voice steady as stone. "That's all any of us can ask for. That's all any of us deserve." She took the wooden ring Samuel had carved from a scrap of oak 20 years ago, the only wedding band a slave could have, and put it on a chain around her neck. It would stay there for the rest of her life. They buried Samuel at dawn in a grove of oak trees. The rest made it to Philadelphia. Martha lived to 91 and became a conductor herself, but she never forgot that night when her husband chose to die free. Years later, when people asked Harriet Tubman about her hardest mission, she always said, "Freedom ain't about reaching the north. It's about deciding you're already free, right where you stand." Samuel died free, and that changed everything. When you're 85 years old, what will you want most? One day of true dignity or a lifetime of safety? Tell us in the comments about someone who chose courage over comfort. Every story of sacrifice deserves to be remembered. Hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories of American heroes. Thank you for keeping their memory alive.